The snow in Boulder Creek, Vermont, had started falling around midnight, and by 6 in the morning, there was already 8 inches coating my driveway with another 6 forecast by noon. I had lived in this house for 12 years, bought the land when it was just wilderness and a dirt road, and built everything from the ground up. The property was a good 15 acres, sitting at the end of what used to be a dead-end road until the Pleasant Valley Estates development went in 5 years ago on the adjacent parcels. My name is Patrick Grayson, and I should have seen the trouble coming the moment that HOA formed. But I had been grandfathered in, my property predating their little kingdom by nearly a decade, so I figured they would leave me alone. That assumption turned out to be spectacularly wrong. I pulled on my winter gear at 6:30 that morning, grabbed my coffee, and headed outside to fire up the snowblower. It was a beast of a machine, a commercial-grade Arians that could clear my long driveway in under an hour. The engine roared to life with its familiar rumble, and I began making my first pass down toward the road. I had barely cleared 20 feet when I saw her marching across the snow like some kind of winter Napoleon. Linda Carmichael, president of the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA, bundled in a purple parka that matched her perpetually pinched expression. She was waving her arms frantically, and even over the sound of the snowblower, I could tell she was shouting, "I killed the engine." "Morning, Linda." "It is 7:03 in the morning," she announced, holding up her phone like it was evidence in a murder trial. The Pleasant Valley Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions clearly state that no excessive noise is permitted before 8 a.m. on weekdays or 9 a.m. on weekends. I blinked at her, snowflakes catching in my eyelashes. "Linda, I'm not part of your HOA. My property was here first. I never signed any CCRs." "The noise ordinance applies to the entire area," she insisted, her voice taking on that shrill quality I had come to associate with her various complaints over the years. "You're disturbing the peace of our community. I need to clear my driveway so I can get to work. I'm a contractor." "No clear driveway means no job site, which means no paycheck." "That's not my problem," Linda said, crossing her arms. "You'll have to wait until 8 a.m. like everyone else, or we'll be forced to take action." I looked at the snow still falling, thinking about the accumulation rate and how much harder this would be if I waited even another hour. "Linda, be reasonable. I've been clearing my driveway at this time for 12 years. Times change, Patrick. We have standards now." She turned and trudged back toward the development, leaving deep footprints in the fresh snow. I stood there for a moment, watching her retreat, then fired the snowblower back up and finished the job. I had work to do, and I was not about to let Linda Carmichael dictate my morning routine on my own property. That afternoon, I found an official-looking letter in my mailbox. The Pleasant Valley Estates, HOA, was informing me that I was in violation of community noise ordinances, and that continued violations would result in daily fines of $250. There was a lot of legal language about community standards and quality of life, all signed with Linda's aggressive signature. I called my lawyer, Marcus Chen, who I had worked with on various property issues over the years. He listened to my explanation and then laughed. "Patrick, they have absolutely no authority over your property. You're not part of their HOA. This letter is meaningless. So I can just ignore it completely. If they try to actually collect any fines, we'll shut it down immediately. They're bluffing, trying to intimidate you into compliance." I felt better after that conversation, but something was nagging at me. I pulled out my property records that evening, spreading them across my kitchen table. My land was a long, somewhat narrow parcel that stretched from the main county road back into the hills. The Pleasant Valley Estates development sat to the east of my property, their access road cutting through what they thought was public right-of-way, except it was not. I had completely forgotten about this detail, but as I looked at the original surveys and deeds, it became crystal clear. When the development company had built Pleasant Valley Estates, they had approached me about purchasing an easement through my land. The town road did not actually extend to their development naturally. There was a gap, a section of about 300 feet that crossed the corner of my property. I had signed a temporary easement agreement, allowing them to use that section of road for access, while they supposedly worked with the town to establish a proper public way. That had been 5 years ago, and I had been getting a modest annual payment of $1,200 for the easement. But as I read through the agreement, I realized it was revocable with 90 days' notice. The development company had apparently never followed through on establishing a public right-of-way, probably because it would have cost them a significant amount of money to do the engineering work and transfer the land properly. This meant that every single resident of Pleasant Valley Estates, all 47 houses, accessed their homes by driving across my private property. I sat back in my chair, coffee going cold in my mug, as I processed this information. Linda Carmichael had just threatened me with fines for using my snowblower on my own property. She wanted to flex her HOA authority where she had none. Maybe it was time to remind her where the actual power lay. The next morning, I deliberately waited until 8 a.m. to run my snowblower, just to avoid any potential hassle. But I had Marcus start drafting a formal revocation of the easement. He called me around 10 that morning. "Are you sure about this? You're going to make a lot of people very unhappy." "They can use the main county road and loop around," I said. "It adds maybe 10 minutes to their drive. More like 20, according to the maps I am looking at, and that road is not maintained as well in winter." "That sounds like a town issue, not a me issue. I have been nice enough to provide this easement for 5 years while they figured out their access situation. They have not figured it out, and now their HOA president wants to fine me for snow removal on my own land." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I will draw up the formal notice. 90 days from when we serve it, the easement terminates. But Patrick, this is going to get messy." "Good. I'm tired of people thinking they can push me around." The notice of easement termination was served to the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA on a Wednesday afternoon. I was not there to see Linda's face when she received it, but I heard about it soon enough. My phone started ringing at 4:30 that afternoon. "You cannot do this." Linda's voice came through so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "This is extortion. It's my property, Linda. The easement was always temporary. You've had 5 years to establish proper legal access to your development. You're doing this because I asked you to respect our community standards. I'm doing this because I am tired of being treated like I am part of your HOA when I am not. You have 90 days. I suggest you use them wisely." She launched into a tirade about lawyers and lawsuits and how I would regret this, but I simply hung up. My hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline coursing through my system. I had never been great with confrontation, but something about Linda's entitled attitude had finally pushed me too far. That evening, I had 3 different neighbors from the development stop by. First was Robert Hayes, a mild-mannered accountant who lived 2 streets into the development. "Patrick, I don't know what happened between you and Linda, but is there any way we can work this out? I've got 2 kids, and that alternate route adds 40 minutes to their school bus ride." I felt a twinge of guilt. "Robert, I've got nothing against you or your family. But your HOA president threatened to fine me for clearing snow on my own property. This easement was supposed to be temporary while the development established proper access. That was 5 years ago. I didn't even know it was temporary, Robert said, running a hand through his thinning hair. Most of us just thought it was a normal road. Take it up with whoever sold you your house. They should have disclosed the access situation. After Robert left, 2 more residents stopped by with similar pleas. I stuck to my position. Then, around 9 p.m., Linda showed up again, this time with a man I did not recognize. He was tall, mid-50s, wearing an expensive-looking wool coat. Patrick Grayson. I'm James Fletcher, attorney for the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA. I think we need to talk about this situation. I invited them into my living room, mostly because it was below freezing outside and I was not a complete monster. Linda sat rigidly on my couch while Fletcher took the armchair. Mr. Grayson, I've reviewed the easement agreement, and while you technically have the right to revoke it, I think you need to consider the consequences. 47 families rely on that access road. You'd be causing significant harm and hardship. Mr. Fletcher, your client threatened to fine me $250 a day for clearing snow on my property at 7 a.m. She claimed HOA authority over land she has no jurisdiction over. Maybe if the HOA had treated me like a neighbor instead of a subject, we would not be having this conversation. Linda finally spoke up. I was just trying to enforce reasonable standards. People in the development were complaining about the noise. Then you should have come to me as a neighbor and asked nicely if I could try to wait a bit longer. Instead, you came with threats and legal demands. You wanted to flex your HOA power, so now I'm flexing my property rights. Seems fair to me. Fletcher leaned forward. What would it take to keep the easement in place? Money. We could increase the annual payments significantly. I had not really thought about that. How significantly? The current rate is $1,200 annually. We could go to $5,000. It was tempting, but I shook my head. This is not about money. This is about respect. Linda treated me like I was beneath her, like I was some kind of problem to be managed. I'm a property owner, same as everyone in that development, and I was here first. So what do you want? Linda demanded, her voice tight. An apology? Fine. I apologize. Happy now. That's the most insincere apology I have ever heard, I said. No, I want the HOA to formally acknowledge in writing that my property is not subject to any of your CCRs, rules, or regulations. I want a permanent exemption from any noise ordinances, architectural standards, or other requirements you try to impose. And I want you, Linda, to resign as HOA president. Absolutely not, Linda said, standing up. You can't dictate our internal governance. Fletcher held up a hand. Let me discuss this with my clients. Mr. Grayson, can you give us a week to put together a proposal? You have got 90 days before the easement terminates. Take all the time you need. After they left, I sat in my living room feeling oddly hollow. Part of me was exhilarated by standing up for myself, but another part wondered if I was being petty. These were families with kids, people with jobs and lives and routines that depended on that access road. But then I remembered Linda's face, the absolute certainty that she had the right to control what I did on my own land, and my resolve hardened. The next 2 weeks were bizarre. The Pleasant Valley Estates HOA held an emergency meeting, which apparently devolved into chaos. Some residents were furious at Linda for provoking the situation, while others insisted they should fight me in court. A petition started circulating, with about half wanting Linda to step down and the other half supporting her leadership. I got hate mail. Someone left a bag of dog poop on my porch. My truck got keyed while I was at a job site, though I could not prove it was anyone from the development. But I also got a few apologetic notes from residents who understood my position and were embarrassed by how their HOA had handled things. Marcus called with updates every few days. They're exploring their legal options, but honestly, they don't have many. The easement is clear. You can revoke it. They'd have to prove you're doing it in bad faith or as part of some illegal scheme and enforcing your property rights because you're annoyed with their HOA president doesn't qualify. What about establishing a prescriptive easement? They have been using it for 5 years. Vermont requires 15 years of continuous use for a prescriptive easement, and it has to be without permission. Since you gave explicit permission via the agreement, that clock never started ticking. So they're stuck. Unless you change your mind, or they work something out with the town to establish a new access road. But that would take months even if they started today, and we're talking probably $200,000 in engineering, legal fees, and construction. On day 23 of the 90-day notice period, I was working on a renovation project in downtown Burlington when I got a call from the Vermont State Police. Trooper Sarah Mitchell asked if I could come down to the barracks to answer some questions. My stomach dropped. What's this about? We've received a complaint about harassment and extortion. I'd rather discuss it in person. I left the job site and drove to the state police barracks, my mind racing through possibilities. Had someone accused me of extortion for revoking the easement? Was this Linda's doing? Trooper Mitchell was professional and direct. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. We sat in a small interview room, and she placed a folder on the table between us. "Mr. Grayson, you're not under arrest and you're free to leave at any time. I just want to get your side of the story. Mrs. Linda Carmichael has filed a complaint alleging that you're engaged in extortion and harassment related to a property easement." I explained the entire situation, from Linda's threat about the snowblower to my discovery of the easement terms to the revocation notice. Trooper Mitchell took notes and asked clarifying questions. "You have documentation for all of this?" "Everything. The original easement agreement, the HOA letter threatening fines, the revocation notice. My lawyer has copies of all of it." She reviewed the timeline carefully. "And you never demanded money or anything else of value to keep the easement in place?" Their lawyer offered to increase the payment. I said no. I told them I wanted a written acknowledgement that my property is not subject to HOA rules, which is already legally true, and that Linda should resign. But I never said they had to do those things or else. I just said the easement is revoked per its own terms. Trooper Mitchell sat back. "Mr. Grayson, between you and me, this doesn't sound like extortion. You're exercising your property rights. Mrs. Carmichael is upset about the consequences, but that doesn't make it a crime. However, I need to ask, have you engaged in any harassing behavior? Phone calls, messages, damage to property? No, I've gotten harassing messages and someone keyed my truck, but I haven't retaliated. Did you file a report about your truck? No, I couldn't prove who did it." She made another note. "Okay, I'm going to document this conversation and let Mrs. Carmichael know that the matter doesn't rise to the level of criminal activity. But Mr. Grayson, let me give you some advice. This situation is clearly very heated. Be careful. Make sure everything you do is documented and don't give anyone ammunition to claim you're acting in bad faith." I left the barracks feeling rattled but vindicated. Linda had actually tried to get me arrested for enforcing my property rights. The woman was either delusional or desperate. That evening, Marcus called with interesting news. The HOA held another emergency meeting. Linda was voted out as president. Apparently, the membership was split, but once word got out that she tried to file criminal charges against you, enough people swung against her that they had the votes. "Who's the new president?" "Guy named Tom Morrison. He's a retired engineer, apparently pretty level-headed. He wants to meet with you." Tom Morrison showed up at my door 2 days later, and I could immediately tell he was different from Linda. He was in his late 60s, with white hair and a self-deprecating smile. We sat at my kitchen table with coffee, and he got straight to the point. "Patrick, I'm not going to blow smoke. Linda screwed up badly, and a lot of us in the development are embarrassed by how this was handled. But we've got 47 families who need a solution, and we're running out of time. What's your proposal? First, we'll put in writing that your property is completely exempt from any HOA rules, regulations, or requirements. That should have been obvious from the beginning, but we'll make it official. Second, we'll increase the annual easement payment to $10,000, adjusted for inflation each year. Third, we'll start working immediately with the town to establish a proper public access road, and we'll keep you updated every step of the way on progress." What about Linda? She's already resigned. She's also talking about moving out of the development entirely, which honestly might be for the best. She made a lot of enemies through this whole thing. I considered Tom's offer. It was reasonable, more than reasonable really. But I had spent a month dealing with harassment and stress because of Linda's power trip. "I want $15,000 annually," I said. "And if after 3 years you haven't made substantial progress toward establishing a public access road, the payment goes to $25,000. I'm willing to keep the easement in place long term, but I want insurance that you're actually working on a permanent solution and not just kicking the can down the road again." Tom thought about it. "I'll need to take that back to the board, but I think we can make it work. Can you give us an extra 30 days before the easement terminates? Just to make sure we get all the paperwork done properly. 60 days. I want this done right with no ambiguity." We shook on it, and Tom left. Marcus drew up a new easement agreement incorporating all the terms we had discussed, including substantial penalties if the HOA tried to claim any authority over my property in the future. The agreement was signed, with full board approval, 42 days after I had originally revoked the easement. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. 3 weeks after the new agreement was signed, I was clearing my driveway at 7 a.m. again when I noticed something odd. There were orange survey markers all along the boundary between my property and the Pleasant Valley Estates development. I finished with the snowblower and walked over to investigate. The markers indicated a new boundary line that cut about 20 feet into my property along the eastern edge. I felt a cold fury building in my chest that had nothing to do with the February temperature. I called Marcus immediately. "Someone's trying to move the property line." "What? Who?" "I don't know, but there are survey markers suggesting my eastern boundary is 20 feet west of where it actually is. Get photos of everything. I'll make some calls." It turned out that Linda Carmichael, even after resigning as HOA president, had hired a surveying company to remark the boundaries. She had somehow gotten her hands on an old, inaccurate survey from the 1970s that showed the property lines differently from the current legal description. The surveying company, working off the information she provided, had placed markers according to the old survey. It might have been an honest mistake, or it might have been a final attempt at revenge. Either way, it was a serious problem. If the incorrect boundary became accepted, I could lose a strip of my land through adverse possession or boundary acquiescence. Marcus got an injunction preventing any reliance on the incorrect survey markers, and we hired our own surveying company to do a comprehensive boundary survey. The cost came to $8,000, but it definitively established the correct property lines and created a record that would prevent future disputes. Then Marcus did something I had not expected. He filed a civil lawsuit against Linda Carmichael personally for the cost of the survey, legal fees, and damages. The complaint alleged that she had knowingly provided false information to the surveying company in an attempt to steal property. "We've got her on email," Marcus explained. She told the surveying company that there was a dispute about the boundary line and that the old survey was correct, but there was no dispute. She created one. That's fraud. The lawsuit got Linda's attention fast. Her lawyer reached out within a week, proposing a settlement. Linda would pay for my survey costs, issue a written apology, and sign an agreement to not engage in any further actions related to my property. In exchange, we would drop the lawsuit. It was tempting to push forward and make her face a judgment, but I was tired of the whole situation. I agreed to the settlement, and Linda paid the $8,000 within 30 days. Her written apology was stiff and formal, clearly drafted by her lawyer, but it acknowledged that her actions had been inappropriate and that she had no claim to any portion of my property. The Pleasant Valley Estates, HOA, now under Tom Morrison's leadership, moved forward with establishing a proper public access road. The process was slow, involving town meetings and engineering studies and environmental reviews, but Tom kept me updated every month. The increased easement payments helped cushion the hassle, and I actually started to feel like a valued neighbor rather than an obstacle to be managed. But the story did not end there. About 6 months after the settlement with Linda, I got a call from Tom Morrison. His voice sounded strained. "Patrick, we've got a problem. A big one." "What's wrong?" Linda's husband, Greg, is on the town planning board. He's been blocking every step of our application for the public access road. We finally got through all the engineering requirements, and now he's claiming there are environmental concerns that need years of additional study. Can he do that? Technically, yes. The planning board has broad discretion on these issues. And he's got one other board member who votes with him on everything, so it's a 3-2 split with our side losing. I felt a headache building behind my eyes. So Linda's still fighting this, just through her husband now. That's what it looks like. And here is the thing. If we don't show substantial progress on the public access road within 3 years, your payment goes to $25,000 annually. We're already 6 months in and we're being stonewalled. I thought about it. What if we go public with this? Make it clear that Greg Carmichael is using his position on the planning board to settle a personal grudge. We'd need proof. Right now, he's just claiming he has legitimate environmental concerns. What kind of environmental concerns? Something about potential wetlands in the area where the new road would go. It's ridiculous. The land has been surveyed multiple times and there are no wetlands, but he's demanding additional studies that would take 18 months and cost about $50,000. This was getting absurd. I called Marcus again and explained the situation. He listened quietly, then said, "This might actually be illegal. If Greg Carmichael is using his position as a town official to pursue a personal vendetta, that could be misconduct in office. Vermont takes that seriously. How do we prove it? We'd need to show that his actions are outside the normal scope of planning board decisions, and that he has a personal motivation. Given the history with his wife, and the fact that this access road directly relates to the easement dispute, I think we've got a case." Marcus filed a complaint with the Vermont Attorney General's office, outlining the history of the easement dispute, Linda's various attempts to harass me, and Greg's current actions on the planning board. The AG's office opened an investigation. Meanwhile, Tom Morrison and several other Pleasant Valley Estates residents started attending town planning board meetings to push back against Greg's obstruction. They brought their own environmental consultant, who testified that there were no wetlands issues. They documented every delay and every spurious objection Greg raised. The situation came to a head at a planning board meeting in August. I attended, sitting in the back of the town hall while Tom and 3 other residents made their case for approving the access road plans. Greg Carmichael sat at the front table with the other board members, his face impassive. When it came time for board discussion, Greg launched into another speech about the need for caution and additional environmental review. But then Sarah Chen, one of the other board members, interrupted him. "Greg, I've been on this board for 8 years, and I've never seen you demand this level of scrutiny for any other project. We've approved subdivisions with far greater environmental impact based on standard surveys. Why is this different?" Greg's face reddened. "I'm just being thorough." "Or you're settling a personal grudge," Sarah said bluntly. "Your wife had a major conflict with Patrick Grayson over an easement issue. Now you're blocking an access road that would resolve that easement situation. That's not thorough. That's vindictive." The room went silent. Greg looked around at the other board members, but no one came to his defense. Finally, he stood up. "I don't have to listen to these accusations. I'm voting no on this application, and that's final." But Sarah was not done. "Actually, I've been talking with the town attorney. If you have a personal conflict of interest related to this application, you're required to recuse yourself from voting on it. Your wife's dispute with Mr. Grayson, and the fact that this access road directly impacts that dispute, creates exactly that kind of conflict." The town attorney, a young woman named Jennifer Walsh, stood up from where she had been sitting to the side. "Mrs. Chen is correct. Mr. Carmichael, based on the history that's been disclosed, I'm advising you that you should recuse yourself from this vote." "This is ridiculous," Greg said. "I'm an elected member of this board, and I have every right to vote." "You have a right to vote on matters where you don't have a personal interest," Jennifer said firmly. "This isn't one of those matters. If you refuse to recuse yourself and the application is denied, I guarantee the decision will be challenged in court and overturned. You'll have wasted everyone's time and money." Greg looked around the room, clearly calculating his options. Finally, with visible reluctance, he said, "Fine. I'll recuse myself. But this is not over." With Greg recused, the vote was 2-1 in favor of approving the access road plans. Tom Morrison and the other Pleasant Valley Estates residents erupted in applause. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had not even realized I was carrying. But Greg had been right about one thing. It was not over. 2 weeks later, the Vermont Attorney General's office concluded their investigation. They found that Greg Carmichael had violated state ethics laws by using his position on the planning board to pursue a personal interest. He was forced to resign from the board and pay a fine of $5,000. The AG's report was scathing, describing his actions as a clear abuse of public trust and using official authority for personal vendetta. The report also revealed something I had not known. Greg had been having regular meetings with the one board member who consistently voted with him, and they had been coordinating their objections to the access road application. That board member, Frank Sullivan, had his own history with the Pleasant Valley Estates, HOA. He had been denied a permit for a shed addition a few years back, and he apparently saw blocking their access road as payback. Frank resigned from the planning board shortly after the AG's report came out, before any formal action could be taken against him. With both obstructionists gone from the planning board, the access road project moved forward smoothly. Construction began in October and was completed by the following spring. The new road established a proper public right-of-way to the Pleasant Valley Estates development, completely independent of my property. Tom Morrison and the HOA board approached me about modifying our easement agreement. With the public access road now in place, They did not really need the easement through my property anymore, though it still provided a slightly shorter route to the main county road. "We'd like to keep the easement as a secondary access route," Tom said. "It's good for the development to have two ways in and out, especially for emergency services. But I'll understand if you want to terminate it now that we have the public road." I thought about it. "Let's keep it, but drop the payment to $7,000 annually. The road's less critical now, but I agree it's good to have the secondary access. And honestly, Tom, you and the current board have been great to work with. I don't mind having you folks as neighbors anymore." We shook hands on the modified agreement. Life settled into a comfortable routine. I cleared my driveway whenever I needed to, sometimes at 7 a.m. or even earlier, and no one complained. The Pleasant Valley Estates development continued to grow and thrive, and I occasionally attended their community events. But there was one more twist. In December, nearly a year and a half after the original Snowblower incident, I received a certified letter from Linda Carmichael's attorney. My heart sank, expecting some new legal action. Instead, the letter contained a check for $20,000 and a handwritten note from Linda. "Patrick, I've spent the past year in therapy, working through anger issues and control problems. I realized that my need to manage and control everything around me cost me my position, my reputation, and my husband's place on the planning board. I made your life hell because I couldn't handle not having authority over you. This check represents the money, Greg, and I spent fighting you. Money we could have used for our retirement, or for our grandchildren's education, or for literally anything else. I wasted it on lawyers and schemes and vindictiveness. You don't owe me anything, but I owe you an apology. A real one. I'm sorry for how I treated you, for trying to impose my will on your property, and for all the harassment and stress I caused. I hope you can eventually forgive me, though I'll understand if you can't." I sat at my kitchen table, reading the note multiple times. It felt genuine in a way her previous legal apology had not. There was pain in the words and what seemed like actual self-awareness. I called Marcus to ask what I should do with the check. "That's up to you," he said. "Legally, you're entitled to cash it. It's not a bribe or anything improper. She's just trying to make amends." I thought about it for a week. Finally, I made a decision. I deposited the check, but I immediately wrote a check of my own for $20,000 to the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA, with a note that it should be used for community improvements. Tom Morrison called me when he received it. "Patrick, this is incredibly generous, but you don't have to do this." "I want to. Use it for a playground or a community center or whatever the residents vote for. Linda's money came from a place of anger and control. Let's turn it into something positive." The HOA eventually used the money to build a small park at the center of the development, with a playground for kids and benches for parents. They put up a small plaque that read, "Community Park, built through cooperation and second chances." I never became close friends with Linda Carmichael. She and Greg moved to Florida a few months later, looking for a fresh start. But before they left, she stopped by my house one afternoon. We sat on my porch, drinking coffee and watching the snow fall. "I was scared," she said quietly. "When I retired and we moved to the development, I felt like I had lost all my purpose. I had been a manager at a pharmaceutical company for 30 years, used to making decisions and having authority. When I became HOA president, I think I tried to recreate that feeling, but I took it way too far." "You did," I agreed. "But you're doing the work now to fix it. That counts for something." "Does it? I cost my husband his position. I made enemies of my neighbors. I spent over a year making everyone miserable, including myself. You're making amends. You're trying to be better." "That's more than a lot of people do," she smiled sadly. I guess. Thank you for not completely destroying us. You could have, you had every right. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I just wanted to be left alone to clear my driveway in peace. We both laughed at that, and some of the tension dissolved. When Linda and Greg's moving truck pulled away a few weeks later, I actually felt a little sad. They were imperfect people who had made serious mistakes, but they were trying to learn from them. Life in Boulder Creek continued. The Pleasant Valley Estates development thrived under Tom Morrison's leadership, and then under the presidents who came after him. My easement payments provided a nice supplement to my contracting income. I eventually started dating Alicia Sullivan, a teacher who had moved into the development about a year after all the drama settled down. We took things slow, both of us gun-shy about relationships, but it felt right. On the 3-year anniversary of the original Snowblower incident, Tom Morrison threw a community barbecue and invited me as the guest of honor. Standing in front of about 100 residents, Tom told the story of how a dispute over snowblower noise had nearly torn the community apart and how cooler heads had eventually prevailed. "Patrick taught us an important lesson," Tom said. "Respect and cooperation work a lot better than rules and control. We're better neighbors now because of what we went through." People applauded, and I felt my face redden with embarrassment. But as I looked around at the families, the kids playing in the park that had been built with Linda's amends money, the development that had learned to work with me instead of against me, I felt genuinely happy. Later that evening, Alicia and I sat on my porch watching the sun set over the Vermont hills. "Do you ever regret how you handled it?" she asked. "Going nuclear with the easement revocation?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "It caused a lot of stress and conflict. But I also don't think anything else would have gotten through to Linda and the others. They needed to understand that their authority had limits, that they couldn't just push people around because they had an HOA. You created a lot of enemies, and a few real friends." Tom's become someone I actually trust. Sarah Chen invited me to her daughter's graduation. Even some of the people who were initially angry with me came around once they understood the whole story. Still, it was risky. The best things usually are. We sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. My snowblower sat in the garage, ready for the next winter storm. I could use it whenever I wanted, at whatever hour necessary, without fear of fines or harassment. It was a small freedom, maybe even a silly one to have fought so hard for. But it represented something larger, a principle about property rights and mutual respect, and not letting petty tyrants control your life. The lights of Pleasant Valley Estates twinkled in the distance, a community that had learned hard lessons about power and cooperation. My property, the land I had built and maintained and defended, stretched out around me. The easement road curved through my property, connecting my neighbors to the wider world. It had been a long, strange journey from that snowy morning when Linda Carmichael first tried to silence my snowblower. We had all made mistakes, learned lessons, and hopefully become better people. The law had worked the way it was supposed to, protecting property rights while also encouraging people to find reasonable solutions. As winter approached again, I found myself almost looking forward to the first big snowfall. I would fire up my snowblower at whatever hour I deemed appropriate, clear my driveway in peace, and maybe wave to my neighbors as they drove past on their way to work. Simple, ordinary, and exactly as it should be, the HOA wars were over, settled not by absolute victory but by mutual understanding. Linda had learned that power without respect breeds resentment. The Pleasant Valley Estates residents had learned that their community existed within a larger world where other people had rights too. And I had learned that standing up for yourself, while difficult and sometimes messy, was worth doing when principles mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Morrison. "First snow forecast for this weekend. Got your snowblower ready?" I smiled and texted back, "Always. See you at 7 a.m. His response came quickly. "Wouldn't expect anything else. Coffee's on me afterward." That was the thing about good neighbors. They did not try to control you. They just offered coffee and friendship and respect. It had taken a property dispute, legal battles, resignations, ethics investigations, and nearly 2 years to get there. But we had arrived at something resembling a genuine community, built not on rules and regulations but on the harder, more valuable foundation of mutual understanding. I went inside, Alicia following me, and started planning dinner. Outside, my property stretched into the darkness, legally protected, properly surveyed, and finally at peace. The easement road remained, a symbol of compromise and cooperation rather than coercion. And somewhere in Florida, I hoped Linda and Greg Carmichael were finding their own peace, learning to let go of control and embrace the messier but more authentic experience of just being neighbors with the people around them. The story of the snowblower and the easement would become local legend, told and retold at town meetings and community gatherings. Details would be exaggerated, motivations simplified, villains made more villainous and heroes more heroic. But at its core, it remained a simple tale about standing up for yourself, about the importance of property rights, and about how even the most contentious conflicts can eventually resolve into something better. As I fell asleep that night, Alicia curled up next to me, I thought about all the mornings to come. The snow would fall, as it always did in Vermont winters. I would clear my driveway, as I always had. And life would continue, complicated and messy and wonderful, in the small corner of the world I had fought so hard to call my own.